Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm thrilled to welcome Courtney Howard from Variety magazine to the podcast today to talk about a big one, Play Misty for Me, the directorial debut of Clint Eastwood, starring Eastwood and Jessica Walter, released 50 years ago in November of 1971. How are we doing, Courtney?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk about this one.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm a huge fan of your Twitter. I follow your Twitter every day. I love all of the stuff you post about anniversaries, and like you are one of my go-to Twitter profiles. I love to follow your stuff on there.
Oh, thank you. I try to keep it light and nice and like cordial.
Yeah. And you don't only recognize like this came out 20 years ago or 50 years ago. Like the other day you were like, All About Steve came out 12 years ago today.
Yeah. We got to get the random
like, this is great
things on there.
Yeah, exactly. So you write for Variety magazine. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how long you've been writing for them?
Yeah, I actually just celebrated an anniversary yesterday from writing for them. I've been doing it for a couple years now. I love it. I've got a great editor there, Peter DeBruge.
Okay.
And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I see a lot of stuff that, I get assigned a lot of stuff that I may have normally either passed over or not have gotten at all.
Okay.
So like I've discovered a lot of up and coming filmmakers that have been nice. And I've discovered a lot of films that have resonated with me. So that's always a positive. And it's been fun. Like I've had a blast working for them. So hopefully it's, it'll be many, many more moons and many, many more reviews and pieces and stuff like that. But yeah, my editors there have been great. Like even when I do more awards coverage type stuff, my editor there, Janelle Riley, is very great. I love her so much. So everybody who works there, like I have been great. Like a lot of the editors there and other departments are awesome, and very communicative and professional. And yeah, it's been great.
That's so cool. And this is kind of the busy months, right? Like the fall season into the award season in the spring.
Yeah, especially because the studios held off on a lot of things during the pandemic. So now it's all sort of coming to a head. So we're getting into like the busy months and seasons and stuff like that, even busier than normal.
Yeah,
where you have like 3 or 4 releases versus like 1 or 2, or it's like double, triple that now.
Yeah.
So, and everybody's timelines are so different. So I think everybody's still figuring out like what quantifies as award season, I think. So like it's different and each and I belong to the LA Film Critics Association too. And so we're having to decide like, what our voting periods are and stuff like that. So it's it's a new age out there, a new era.
It's not like you have until December 31st, right? Like, don't you have to see everything by a certain date, like even before the end of December?
Yeah, it's mostly like, I think we extended it 1 or 2 weeks last year because we were able to, but I don't know what we're going to do this year quite yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's usually like beginning of December is when we sort of cast our votes and stuff.
Right.
But then last year it was like mid-December. We got a little bit extra time, which was really, really great to have, since there's a lot of us, even though I see a lot, there's a lot of catch up to do at the end of the year. And I like to be like, well informed. So everybody's process is different, but I like to see a lot of the stuff people are chatting about. So so that's been a great community to be a part of too, the LA Film Critics Association.
Yeah, that's so cool. And you have a lot of new movies to watch, so it means a lot to me. You took the time to look at a 50-year-old movie this last week, a movie that started the directing career of Clint Eastwood, who just had his newest film, Cry Macho, open. I don't know if you saw his new one, but he's still going strong at 90, 91. Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy to look back and think, oh, this is his directorial debut, and how far he's come or how far he's regressed, or just to see a nice overview.
Yeah. So before we get into the film, I also wanted to ask you, like, kind of what got you interested in films? I think I read on one of your bios that it was E.T., the extraterrestrial, that like when you were very young and you said, oh, this is this is something really remarkable and special. Like, do you remember like that experience and other films you saw when you were younger that really got you into this and made you want to pursue it as a career, looking at films?
Yeah, I mean, the AT experience was, I'm sure, like for everybody, no matter what age they were.
Yeah.
Like I was 6. And so I was like, whoa, this is what movies could be like. Holy cow. And
Yeah.
it scared me and I loved it. And it was like, such a thrilling ride. But when I first started to get like sort of serious about like, okay, this could be a career that I would want to do, is more like teenage years. So like,
Right.
it's going to sound silly, but Adventures in Babysitting, I loved a lot. And one of the producers, Deborah Hill, had done Halloween. She worked a lot with John Carpenter. And I grew up in a pretty like conservative household, so we didn't see a lot of horror movies. So I didn't come to Halloween until I was like in my late teens, and I was terrified still. It was still too early for me to see that movie.
Yeah, so this episode is actually dropping on Friday, October 29th. This is our Halloween episode. So yeah, Deborah Hill is a great name to mention because one of my favorite film producers. She also produced Clue, one of my favorite comedies, and of course Halloween, the original, which is my favorite horror film. I still love it to this day.
Yeah, so that sort of got me thinking, oh my gosh, like this could be something that I want to do. And Linda Obst, the other producer on there too, is such a powerhouse. And so I started sort of like thinking, oh, maybe this is something that I would want to do, not necessarily producerial role, but I thought maybe directing. But college sort of tried to figure it out if I wanted to be on production or do something else. And at first I did want to do stuff involved in production. So I learned that whole craft and what goes into that. And of course, it's always changing. And I actually interned at Deborah Hill Productions.
Oh, wow.
In college. So the story comes full circle. And I told her, Adventures in Babysitting meant a lot to me. Not just as a babysitter myself, but
what was it like to work with Deborah Hill? I'd love to hear about just your interactions with her.
She was great. She was always busy. She's very, very loyal to her filmmakers too. But she was busy on production on Crazy in Alabama, which was Antonio Banderas's directorial debut. And towards, she's of course since passed away. But towards, when I was there, she was taking on more of a mentorship role to a lot of up and coming filmmakers. So I think she had mentored Chris Columbus. She had mentored, I think, Antoine Fuqua, I think she mentored. But she also was sort of guiding along a lot of the other productions that she would be producing. So she was a really hands-on producer. And she's such a lovely woman. If you needed anything, you could call her and she could get it for you, sort of a thing. I never had to, do any favors like that, but like she was really, really great. And the funny sort of side of the story is I actually met my husband at that office.
Oh, cool.
He was her assistant on Escape from LA.
Right.
And
96.
Yeah. So he had been working production on that, and then went on to become her assistant for a couple of years. And then he left and became a screenwriter and started working for Disney and yada, yada, yada. So it's sort of, and then, production is really, really hard, especially for, women, and thinking, am I going to dedicate my whole life to this? So I sort of had a few restless years after college of like, what am I going to do with my life? All along the way, people have been telling me you should write about film. So I was like, I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know how, academic I sound or if I sound good at all writing about film. But right around the time when my mom passed away, I was like, I'm just going to have a year of say yes to opportunities that arise. And it was actually through the magic of Twitter, where an editor at one of my former sites had found me and asked me twice, do you maybe want to come and write for us? And I was like, okay, sure. I finally relented and was like, okay, I'll try it for a year. And if I don't like it, then I can sort of wander away. But I loved it. So here I am today.
That's so fantastic.
Yeah.
So how long have you been writing film criticism?
about 10 years.
10 years. Very
So
cool.
I've put in my elbow grease, my hard work. I've seen things you wouldn't believe, kid.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I've been through it all.
Yeah. Yeah, so that takes us to our film today. So, like, what has been your relationship with the films of Clint Eastwood? Are you a fan of his work? Like, do you have some favorites of Clint's, like, over the years, either as just an actor or a director?
Yeah. Well, I came to his films through film school in college. So
Right.
we started in on, I think it was For a Few Dollars More, I think, or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, one of the two they showed. So that was my first, like, my dad would have his movies on in the background, but I was never quite, committed to that sort of thing until, film school. And so I watched him as an actor first. And of course, I grew up in the time of Unforgiven and stuff, but I was not a very Western person at that time. But I've since come to love Unforgiven. Like, I think it's a great movie. I think he as a filmmaker is really great. But yeah, so I am a fan. There's, some of his later works have been a little iffy, like, The Mule, I'm not really crazy about. And
Jersey Boys.
Yeah, Jersey Boys was not great, but God bless him, he had the passion. He really wanted to make something good, but it just didn't quite turn out the way that I'm sure. I don't know, it just didn't turn out right. But obviously he's had some missteps. But Bridges of Madison County I watched over the pandemic, and oh my God, what a movie.
I
That was
love that
so
film.
great. I love that movie. I was crying buckets. Like, I pressed play at like midnight, not knowing the time. And the time just flew, and I was crying at like 3 a.m, like sobbing.
Yeah, Meryl Streep in the car at the end is just one of the most moving sequences that Eastwood's ever put on film. It's just like, you just want her desperately to get out, but she's not going to. It's
Yeah.
so hard.
It's heartbreaking. And it's nice to see, like, this guy. He's since gone back to that too. And I think there's a little bit of it in Cry Macho, just a little bit, but seeing a man who's like known for his machismo and his like, laconic, gruff sort of like stoicism, be vulnerable and open and romantic. And like, that's a huge deal. So I found that really impressive that he was able to sort of go to those places. So that was
I like another thing I like about Clint Eastwood's films as director is that he mixes up genres, right? He doesn't just do the same movie over and over. I mean, even though Jersey Boys wasn't great, it was like, oh, he's making a musical. like he's one of those directors who will try different things and not just do the same thing twice. And watching Play Misty for Me, I'm like, did he ever really make a genuine thriller ever after this? I mean, I guess the closest thing would be kind of Mystic River, has some thriller elements in it, but did he ever make like a full-on thriller after Play Misty for Me? I'm not sure he did.
No, he didn't. Like, it seemed to be sort of like this one and done sort of thing. And I think in that documentary that's on the Blu-ray, he had mentioned that it wasn't planned that way, that it would just be, a one and done. Like, he said he would do another one if it came his way, but it would have to be just as good as, if not better than, Play Misty for Me.
Yeah, I think he talked about how, exactly right, that I think if the script was there, if there was something worth doing, but in a career that spanned now 50 years as a director, I guess he just hasn't come across a script that he was up to task, or that was good enough for him to take on to make a movie of a thriller, suspense, horror genre of some kind. This is kind of like the only one, which I find I find that interesting. Most directors who their first movie's a thriller or horror or something, usually they make more. So it's kind of interesting that this is kind of his only one.
Yeah, it's such a departure from his other work. Like, I wish we would see sort of more of that. But granted, he's still, Richard Jewell was great. That felt like sort of a departure
that had some thriller elements too. Yeah, he's always mixing it up, whether he's in the movie or he's not in the movie. I guess it makes sense for this first one that he directed that he would have been in it too, because they have to sell it on his name. So it wouldn't make sense. But so let's get into Play Misty for Me. I have a short little synopsis on the movie for those of our listeners who might not have seen this yet. So it's about disc jockey Dave, played by Clint Eastwood. He attracts an obsessed fan named Evelyn, played by Jessica Walter, who he takes home with him one night after she approaches him in a bar. She likes to call into his work time and time again to ask him if he can play the song Misty for her, thinking of their night together as a one-time fling. Dave is surprised in the coming days to see her time and time again, recognizing pretty quickly that her behavior is erratic, potentially even dangerous. When he falls for an old flame named Toby, played by Donna Mills, Evelyn makes it her mission to take down any chance for Dave to be happy with this other woman. It's kind of the main concept. I mean, if you've seen Fatal Attraction from '87, there's a lot of similarities between the two movies, as we mentioned briefly before we started recording. But this came first. This was the first one. So
yeah, and this one is also different too. There's a
Yeah.
little bit of a marked difference too, because unlike Fatal Attraction, where he's married and has kids and he's
Yeah.
got like he's tied down to something, you know, Dave is sort of free and clear to do whatever he wants. Like he's got this girlfriend he wants to reconcile with, played by Donna Mills, but you know, they're not a for sure thing. So he's sort of like, you know, this could be something that, you know, I sort of imagined it as, you know, stoking the fear in like every man in America. Like Fatal Attraction sort of hung on this, like stoking fear in every man in America or with the whole world or whatever, of like not to cheat on their wife, but like this could happen at any time. Like, you know, you go and pick up a stranger in a bar and you don't know what's on the other side of that conversation. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this person could be crazy or they could be a normal person. And then, I mean, that's relationships for you. You get to know. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And what I love so much about this movie is that kind of it's reminded me a little bit of like Kathy Bates in Misery. When we first meet Jessica Walter in this movie, she seems very just innocent and very sweet and beautiful and not like nothing's wrong. You know? And that's part of why the movie works as well as it does, because in the beginning you're kind of like, oh yeah, you should go home with her. She seems like a good catch and a great lady. And then it's like, as the movie goes on, you're like, uh-oh, maybe not so much.
Yeah, you're totally right. Like you think that it's all, you know, all innocent and that they're going to be adults about this and it's going to be fine. But then when she starts, you know, showing up again and under these weird sort of situations and him not being cool with it and her not getting it, then you're like, oh my gosh, this is not going to end well.
Yeah. So as I said, this was his first movie as director. From the documentary, it sounded like it wasn't super hard for him to basically get the job as director. Like he just met with like the executive at Universal it was, and he said, I want to star in this and I want to direct it. And the guy said, okay. And it wasn't until later that they were like, oh, well, we don't want to pay you to direct it though. And Eastwood was like, fine, don't pay me. I'll take points on the grosses. I don't need to be paid to direct it. I want to show my stuff. Right.
And that was wound up being like, and he even said that wound up being a good thing because, you know, it was a massive hit and playing for weeks and weeks on end, months on end.
Yeah, because I don't think people had really seen a movie like this before. Were there a lot of films? I mean, obviously there's Psycho. I mean, there's some, but like this idea of like the stalker for the whole movie. I feel like that wasn't around very much in '71, right?
No, I don't think so either. Like, I think after it, there were more movies that sort of dealt with this repercussions of cheating, like, you know, Crimes of Passion or Fatal Attraction, or, you know, even later on and Faithful. But like, this seems to be a pioneering thing that just really stuck and hit on something that was in the zeitgeist that could be something different that, you know, no one had even sort of suspected, but does sort of happen, because I think the gal who wrote The Treatment based this on a girlfriend of hers that she knew, who of course didn't commit homicide or anything, but like got to be a little stalkery with a boyfriend.
Joe Helms, I believe her name was. So did she write Joe Hymes? Did she write, like, she wrote the full screenplay as well as The Treatment, right? Like she wrote full script.
She wrote sorry, I can't talk. You can edit that out. She wrote the Treatment, which was like, I think he said 60 pages. And then for the screenplay, she wrote a screenplay. And then I think he had one of his buddies come and like do not really a polish, but he also got screenplay credit, Dean Reisner. So they sort of so it's sort of credited to two people. And so Dean came in to sort of like make sure the male perspective was there, but also retain the ladies' voices in the movie as well. So
Yeah.
so it does have like the female perspective in there, but also a very male voice in there as well.
Exactly. And the storyline, I guess, was originally set in Los Angeles, but Eastwood thought, I want to set this in a place I know a little better, in Carmel near Monterey. Have you ever been to that area before?
Yeah, I grew up in Northern California, so we were
Okay.
always at the Monterey Bay Aquarium a lot. And Monterey is gorgeous, and so is Carmel. Like my husband and I went and vacationed in Carmel. It's such a friendly place where, like, you know, you walk down the street, you know, people there, and like you say hi. It's such a friendly thing. It's very dog
Right.
friendly place too, but a lot of golfers go there. It's big on golfing, and but yeah, it's beautiful up there.
Yeah, we celebrated Thanksgiving 2017, I want to say, in Carmel. That's a place that I've been to before when I was younger. It's actually where I met Clint Eastwood at the AT&T Pro-Am. And I think it was 1999.
Neat.
I got to meet him at that golf tournament and got to meet Samuel Jackson, some really cool actors there. And I saw Clint Eastwood, and I was with my grandmother at the time, Barbara, and she knew Clint Eastwood when she was in her teens. Like the families were friends. And I got to see her say hi to Clint Eastwood. And I mean, he could have just been acting and saying hi, but the way he said hi to her and gave her a hug, it felt like he knew who she was. And as a young film fan at 14 or 15, whatever I was, it was a really memorable moment. I remember that moment so well. And he gave me a handshake, and I got to say a few words to him. And so that was really cool.
That's so nice. I love that story.
Yeah. She says she claimed that they actually went on a date once when they were like 14. Like they went to a movie together, that there was nothing really happened, but they, like, just the two of them went to a movie. I'm like, oh my God.
Do you know what movie?
I don't know. She couldn't remember. I asked her once. She couldn't remember. I think she was so, like, infatuated with him, she probably wasn't looking at the screen.
Oh, for sure.
So that's been a lifetime, being able to tell everyone, oh, my grandma dated Clint Eastwood.
I love that. I love that. I mean, he's a stone cold fox. So.
He is gorgeous in this movie, Play Misty for Me. Like, I was I wrote in my notes, I said, is this the most handsome he's been on film? Like, what is he here? Like 40? He's like 40-ish. He looks great.
Yeah, he looks fantastic. Like, yeah, and he's like, I think in the documentary, Jessica Walter said when she first met with him, he offered her carrot juice and she politely declined. But you know, that health conscious, like, you know, early 70s health consciousness, like you could tell he's taking care of his body and what have you. But yeah, he's got, his hair looks great, his face looks great, he looks great. He looks great. He's a good looking man.
There's a scene where he's walking around in his tidy whities. I'm like, okay, so he's directing this scene. So he chose this.
Yeah, but also the wardrobe budget was very, very small, so his tidy whities needed to reflect that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the connection I got.
So yeah, this was shot in Carmel, and I really think it does add something really great to the movie. A lot of helicopter shots of like the ocean and the cliff side, and the way that plays into the finale and all of that. Like, I think it could have worked in another city, but there's something about the feeling of the place that, I mean, Big Little Lies was set in Monterey, right? I want to say, but there's not a whole lot of projects I've seen in Monterey, Carmel area. So that was kind of cool. And having been there before, I mean, even though it was in the early 70s, Carmel hasn't changed that much over the decades. So that was cool too.
Yeah. And I don't think that like Big Little Lies really, I mean, I don't know that they really engaged with the, you know, sort of atmosphere of the like coastline as much as it's worked into Play Misty for Me, where obviously, spoilers, the end sort of happens.
Yeah, and we can talk about the end. We don't have to. It's 50 years old if you haven't seen it by now.
If you haven't seen it by now, you really need to catch up. But, you know, the jagged coastline plays, you know, a very big part of the ending. And, you know, the ending wouldn't be there without it. But yeah, it's like you said, it's worked in very well into into the narrative here.
And then, I mean, we've talked about a little bit before. We talked about Beguiled earlier this year. I talked about that film with Keith Phipps, and this 71 was a really important big year for Eastwood. I mean, he's in The Beguiled, which wasn't a huge hit, but really interesting kind of departure for him. He plays a really awful guy in that, the kind of performance we hadn't really seen from him in his previous few movies of the late 60s and 1970. And then he's also in Dirty Harry in 71. So both of those projects, he's directed by Don Siegel. And then Play Misty for Me, his first film as director, he directs Don Siegel as the bartender, which I find really, really interesting, right? I think it's 2 scenes that Don Siegel is in. And did you read the story online of the first day of filming was a scene with Siegel and Eastwood? He like they did a scene like 11 times. And then he said to his cameraman, he said, oh, sorry, I forgot. Put some camera in the film. I think it was a joke, but I'm like, that's a great way to get started.
Yeah. And I think Don had been saying like he was nervous too, like as an actor.
Yeah.
So like he had a lot of nerves and he was going to like, you know, he kept on reading off of the script and like Clint was like, you can't do that. Like, you know, let's just shoot, let's just do it. And a lot of it, he said it wound up being like a lot of it was a lot of improv and it worked out great. So like, you know, it was nice that Don was able to sort of shadow him on the production and sort of like, you know, collaborate with him again in a new manner, but also like be there for him if, you know, Clint needed his help. But I think even Don said he didn't wind up needing his help at all. Like Don was like, he was a pro about this. Like he knew what he was doing immediately.
Yeah, they were good friends at this point. I think they had collaborated on at least one other film in the late 60s, might have been Coogan's Bluff. Like they had worked together a few times, and Siegel was one of his big champions, and he was all for Clint Eastwood directing. And I think he even, they say in the documentary, Dirty Harry, like Siegel got sick, and so he had Eastwood film some things like on Dirty Harry too. So yeah, so he was like a big champion. It's kind of cool that he's also in his first movie as director in a couple scenes. And I think he's very charming in the movie as the bartender. I would have liked to have seen him act more. I think he has a great face, and like it would have been interesting to see him in more films, not just as the director.
He had a great demeanor, like an on-screen demeanor of like he seemed relaxed enough. So
that mustache.
So it must have worked out. But it's nice that like he and Don like made these movies together that really like pushed boundaries and like got you to think more about not just the narrative on the surface, but like how does this impact society? What does this say about society? What does this say about feminism? Because you know that's starting to come into play too during that time, and you know the time of the Beguiled, and which has you know very blunt things to say about you know women, and which I did like the Beguiled. I like both versions. I think have an interesting way of you know with their sentiments, but and then this too, like how it engages with feminism. So. It's very interesting, I think. And of course, Dirty Harry just, you know, really blows everything out of the water.
Oh, yeah. And that's the last film that came out in 71. That came out in December, which we'll get to in a couple months. But yeah, I mean, he talked a little bit on the DVD, the documentary, like, you know, there's not a whole lot of great roles for women in leading roles around this time in 70, 71. Like we talked about Clute in June, and that's just such a remarkable performance from Jane Fonda. But I think they wanted, the studio wanted Lee Remick to play Evelyn, and they wanted a more of a name, but it was Eastwood who insisted, no, I want to go with this actress who I liked from The Group, a film by Sidney Lumet from 1966. And, you know, she had been in a few kind of, you know, quality films, maybe not like the biggest hits of all time, but she had done some roles in the 60s. And so he had noticed her. And so, yeah, he went after Jessica Walter, but I don't think in 1970 she was much of a name. Like, so he took a chance on her, thought she had the right look, and had given, I think, one scene in the movie The Group that he just was like, oh, okay, I think she's the one for this. And she is a great choice for this movie. I just loved her in that.
I also love the juxtaposition between her look and her, you know, attitude versus the, you know, blonde, blue-eyed Donna Mills, like soft-spoken. You know, but like here's Jessica Walters. It's like this brute force. Like you do not mess with her. You know, you don't come out of your apartment or whatever or your house and say, "Please keep it down." She will bite your head off.
Which we see like, very early on.
But yeah, there's like you know, there's a nice sort of like contrast between the two actresses there. Who they say they were friends in real life, like too. Cool. So that was really fun to learn. That like, you know, when Donna Mills needed a place to live, Jessica Walter was like, come live in my guest house. And so she did for like a couple months. So like they got along just fine. And I, characters notwithstanding, I think it's funny when you see somebody so good at like a role where it's so scary and you're like, oh, they're probably like really scary in real life, but no, they're the nicest people in real life.
Yeah. I don't know where she got that anger and that
Yeah, where
like
she pulled from
psychoticness, but it feels very real. Like it does not feel like she's just acting that. Like it feels like it's coming from a place of authenticity. I don't know where she got it. It's pretty great.
She had said that, like, Jessica had said that she was sort of playing her as the girl next door the entire time. So she was trying to play her with like, seriousness and like straightforward as like, this nice, person. So, I guess it's always that case with the actors whenever, when you talk to them, it's like, do you have to sympathize with your villain? And it sort of feels like, even though they say, no, you don't, it's obvious they sort of do, to play a character that goes to these depths and do these horrible things, to sort of bring it to life and sort of explore these like different facets of these people's darker personalities. So I don't know.
Yeah. So the last thing I have is in typical Eastwood style, he wrapped the film 4 days early and under budget, which I feel like is a thing for him, right? Doing the 2 takes and moving on, which I think Jessica Walter talked about that on the documentary. Like she was kind of taken aback by how few takes they would do. So he was doing that from movie one in the late 70s. The film was a box office hits, and I think that helped him get his next movie and the next one after that. He started directing more films, I think, as early as like 72, 73, and basically been directing ever since. I don't think there's been much of a lull between films since 71. He's been pretty active ever since. And then the movie got one major nomination. Jessica Walter was nominated for the 1972 Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a Drama, losing to Jane Fonda in Clute. So that was the only nomination, big nomination the movie got.
That's a pretty good nomination to have, though, despite the Golden Globes and, their controversies now, but it's still a pretty big honor to have, at least, then. Maybe it was a little more, had a little more credibility then, but.
Yeah. No, it's always interesting to me, like, to see what films get a lot of nominations, what films don't. And I was like, okay, Jessica Walter had to be nominated for something for this, right? So she didn't get nominated at the Oscars, but at least she got that. So I was like, okay, cool. Like someone recognized her for this because she's really great.
Yeah, and to go up against, like, not against, but to be mentioned in the same category of Jane Fonda and Clute, like you were saying, is like pretty phenomenal. Like Jane Fonda is amazing in Clute.
Oh, she's so good. That was a pretty worthwhile win for both of the Golden Globes and at the Oscars that year. All right, so that takes us to our thoughts on the movie just overall. What did we think of Play Misty for Me? Had you seen this movie before? Had it been a while? Like, or was this your first watch, or what was that?
It had been just a little while. I watched it a couple years ago with my husband, and we were just remarking at the time, like, we sort of did a little bit of a superficial wade into the not the deep end of like information about the movie. So we only went so far as to our research before we were watching it, as far as to like, there wasn't anything, like, what struck us the most was that there wasn't anything like this out at the time. Like, obviously we know how history works, so Fatal Attraction wasn't out then, but like, it's so weird that this hit, and then 16 years later or whatever, I can't do math, Fatal Attraction comes out and has the same sort of, stokes the same sort of reaction, if not even bigger, maybe just because there's more people on the planet then, but an even bigger reaction. And that seems to take all of the, like, female stalker, like, that seems to take all the attention away from Play Misty for Me. Doesn't get as much attention, I don't think, these days as Fatal Attraction. I think Fatal Attraction is everybody's sort of go-to in their mind when it comes to sort of that, sort of narrative. But yeah, I had seen it before, so last night, just rewatching it again, it all sort of came back to me, and I was able to concentrate more on like how he framed certain shots and some, foreshadowing in the production design too. Like when he first sees her at the bar, she's sort of off to the
her. Yeah, I
side.
love her introduction in the back, right? You don't see her full on. Yeah, very, very great moment.
She's sort of like off in like sort of the sidelines, and she's sort of illuminated by this weird like wheel that sort of, I don't know what it was, but the design on it looked like scissor handles. So and they all sort of pointed to her like in the middle. So I don't know, I thought that was brilliant foreshadowing. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. But yeah, so it had been a hot minute since I had seen it again, but I had watched it before and was really struck by it, and again struck by how at that time Clint Eastwood was really engaging with feminism, and how he wrote these collaborated with screenwriters to sort of bring these sort of deeper concepts into the zeitgeist and made audiences think about deeper things. So that's what struck me the most, and still did this time as well.
Yeah, so like, what do you like best about the movie? What do you think works the best in it? What maybe parts of it that you don't think work as well 50 years later? Anything in there that maybe hasn't aged, or like what it's kind of like, what do you think works the best in it, and what has maybe not aged as well, do you think?
Yeah, I think what works best is still the horror elements. I think those are really interesting from him, especially from Clint Eastwood as a director. Since we haven't seen much of that, going on like we were talking about before, but the way he frames certain shots and the way he sort of constructs the energy and sort of frenzy of those moments of him rushing to the house to sort of save his potential his lady love.
That's a great moment. Yeah, with the editing back and forth, there is really cool.
Yeah, so like how he constructs that with his editor and sort of reframes that. And so I think that works the best. I'm still sort of torn on the question of, just like Fatal Attraction, like, so does this let him off the hook? Sort of at the end, I'm still sort of questioning that. And that's sort of what's carried over all these months. Like, so is he, given the ending where, spoiler alert, we can talk spoilers, right?
Yeah. We can say that Walter falls to her death at the end of this movie, Evelyn.
He punches her, she falls out a window, she crashes through a window and then trips and falls and crashes, on the jagged cliffs, like, a dummy goes over and she's there in the water, dead. So
it's an ending that reminded me of Macaulay Culkin falling to his death at the end of The Good Son.
Yes, exactly.
A very different kind of movie. But would you say that part is a little bit cheesy? I mean, the fact that he punches her,
and
she just
I know,
like flies through the window and over the. I mean, it's so cheesy that I kind of love it, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, that's a little much, but okay.
It's a little much, and I thought of Arrested Development. I always think of maybe going, well, that was a freebie. So I thought of that too in my mind, but up until that point, you're totally with, you're with it, you're with the suspense, you're with the thrills, you're with the horror, and but it wasn't so much of like a man punching a woman, which I know probably at the time that was also pretty audacious and a bold move for them to do, and I'm sure that inspired a lot of like talk from the studios and like, oh, how can we show, but I think it all came down to and probably why they allowed it was by at that point anyone wants to punch her, because she's such a horrible, like, she's been doing all these horrible things. But I would be curious, and I wish I could have sort of went a little deeper into my research to read other critics' reviews at the time to see how they sort of portrayed Jessica Walter's character in their reviews, because I think someone had said, oh, she's a nympho or whatever, and I was like, what? That's not quite right. Like, that seems not right. So like, thank God for female film critics now who can sort of like, yeah, that's not right. That's not how you classify a woman.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me.
she wasn't a nympho. She was just
Right.
stalking this guy. She was just crazy for this guy.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me about the original ending of Fatal Attraction, where Glenn Close just slices her throat by herself and then tries to blame it on him. And audiences didn't like that because they hated her so much.
Yeah.
They had to go back and reshoot like a more action-packed ending. And it's kind of similar to the ending we get in Play Misty for Me. It's kind of like it's a showdown between the two and they're fighting and she's slicing him open with a knife and he's just like trying to get her off of him. And so there is that element. I think by the end of this movie, most audience members are just going to hate her so much. Like once he punches, I mean, I cannot imagine what the reaction was in theaters around the country in 71 when he punches her through the window. I'm sure there's a lot of clapping, right? Like people going nuts.
Yeah, I think it was Gail, somebody on Twitter had said it was like, what's a big moment for a movie where there was lots of cheers or something, and so everybody was posting their moments. I'm sure this is probably one of those moments where people were like in the Cinerama Dome like, yes, cheering.
I posted the moment at the end of The Mist when Marcia Gay Harden gets shot by when she's like, kill the kid, kill the whore, kill them all, and then she just gets shot in the head. I'll never forget. I was in a crowded theater opening night, and I've never heard a roar like that from an audience. So they were just like, "Yeah." I was like, "Whoa, okay." This is a moment that I'm never gonna forget, and I'm assuming there was similar kind of reactions when she gets punched through the window. Although the way it's cut is so awkward. Like she like falls over the ledge and she goes, ugh. Like she just makes like a sound, and then you just see this clear dummy falling down. It looks a little weird. It looks like, okay. Yeah. And that's really her in the last shot, though. That's cool. That's really her at the end.
As a contrast to like how good the sequence of him rushing to, his girlfriend's house, how great that is captured in editing. The sort of fudging things with her death is a little sort of like, it's a little squidgy. Yeah.
I would say I really like the film. I do think the first half works a little better than the second. Like once she gets like full on psychotic in the second half, I mean, maybe it partly shows his lack of familiarity with the genre, like some of the suspense stuff, like when she just like stabs the detective guy. I'm like, That's one of my favorite moments of the movie when David comes up and he sees the dead detective and he has no reaction of any kind.
None.
He just looks down. He's like, oh, and then he keeps walking in. I'm like, you were just talking to this guy, like nothing. Okay.
To be fair, he really didn't care for that detective. He like sort of was kind of not digging that guy.
Yeah.
But was like, that one scene where like after his housekeeper gets slashed to bits, like Clint Eastwood Dave is still sort of in this mode of like not giving much to the detective. And so he's like, well, how did she get in here? Like, which of course he really doesn't know. But then he was like, how did those, slashes on her wrist happen? And it's funny that Dave like kind of protects her and is like, I don't know, even though he clearly knows, but he could give that information to the detective. He just chose not to. So I don't think he really cared for that guy. So seeing him dead on the ground, like, okay. Yeah. That's fine. How would I explain this anyways? I'm glad he's dead.
But yeah, I thought once he goes into full on psycho territory, I mean, it's weird, right? From 50 years on, I'm like, oh, we've seen this before, but it's like, oh, but this was the first time a lot of people had seen this. But I just thought like her erratic behavior in the first like 45 minutes was like just so well done. Like every time we see her, there's just a little bit more nuttiness, her honking at that guy, her screaming at those two guys on the steps, and you're just seeing in his eyes, like, oh, there's something kind of wrong with everything leading up into when she slashes her wrists in the bathroom. I just thought like the pacing of the movie was just perfect. Like the way that character was unraveling. I just thought that worked really well. And I think what works so great about the movie too, is that Clint Eastwood is like this just naturally handsome, suave guy. And so of course he can get any woman he wants, but like what happens when he takes that woman home and it's a woman that's not going to play by the rules, and how does he deal with that? I think he was right to cast himself in that role too, just because like a lot of men could identify with that character. And I think the way Clint Eastwood plays it, so confused and baffled by like her behavior, I think that works really well all throughout the movie too.
I mean, it's such an audacious thing. Like, he's never had to deal with this sort of thing before. Like, he's probably never had a conflict in his life because he's so gorgeous.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, he's never been faced with anything like this before. And so for him to bring home a woman who just doesn't, lie back and accept like him being sort of this cad and treating her, also like they both, not that he was being a cad, because they both sort of agreed to, hey, let's just be adults about this and let's have sex and do our own thing, and like they both seemed to be on the same page. So like nobody was led astray until he actually was led astray, where she's like starts really just overbearing and suffocating him. And I like that one scene where after her suicide attempt, and she wakes up and she screams and she's like, I had this dream that I was drowning. And like the camera, like the look on his face and the way the camera zooms in on him, it's a little obvious, but I like the whole like, but it's him that's drowning and him that's suffocating because of her behavior. So like, how dare she have this dream? Like the irony of it all is like really compacting and like hitting him at that moment. I thought that was well done.
Yeah, and after she has that suicide attempt, we have some moments with her where she's much quieter and she's much like, we kind of feel for her for a good 20 minutes in the middle. Like we've been kind of scared of her a little bit, but after that attempt, she's like, she's more soft-spoken and she's crying. And so you're not hating her all the way through the movie. There's like a section in the middle where you're kind of like almost on her side in some ways. But then once she like says she's going to Hawaii, it's after she's booked, right, for when she attacks.
Right after, I think,
in the house.
I think there's a marked change in energy in the movie.
Right.
When they have the whole, I call it the Carmela's for Lovers sequence. Where he goes off and sort of, it's the whole Roberta Flack, the first time I ever saw your face sequence, where he goes off and makes love to his wannabe girlfriend, or his returning essentially reconciling with his girlfriend Toby, in the woods. And on one hand, like you're sort of lulled into this sort of like complacency of like, oh good, everything's going to be okay, like he can breathe now, he can do his own thing because she's booked, she's off somewhere booked, and he can finally like relax, and that'll be the end of that. But I think it also turns to, because then like you said, there's a whole nother energy to the remaining third of the film, where it just turns into sort of a psycho sort of different vibe picture, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And he could have gone it could have gone in a different direction. It could have gone in like a more reserved, like she didn't necessarily have to go to the house and like tie up the other girl and like put like put like tape over her mouth. But it's, I don't know, because of Walter's performance, it feels so real. Like you go with it all the way to the end.
I also did not see the whole, oh, I have this new roommate.
That's a good twist. I like that too. Yeah.
It was a great twist, and I think it was built in really, really well. And I also liked the sort of the second unit shots that they got at the Monterey Jazz Festival.
Oh, right.
Too. Like I think that really came together nicely
as it's really happening, as it's like actually happening.
As it's actually happening. So I liked that whole sort of sequence in there, which was also after the Carmela's for Lovers sequence.
I mean, I thought that scene was a little long for me. Like that. I mean, I wrote down, I'm like, this is the closest Clint Eastwood has ever made a softcore porno film.
Yes. That part is
like,
a little,
it's like the camera's floating up the arms. And I'm like, I felt like some of the moments with Toby when they're walking and talking and it goes on for 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, we get it. Like, yeah. I felt like the movie's about an hour and 40. Could have been 90.
Could have been tighter.
He could have tightened some of that up by a few minutes, I think. And he has some nice shots. Like there's a shot of them like kissing. Yeah. Like, you see like the sunset and the distance. Yeah, there's some really nice photography.
Yeah, it's a nice postcard moment. Like him and his cinematographer did a very nice job. capturing things in this movie.
And I think it couldn't just be all Walter all the time. I think those moments where she's off screen, it kind of makes you wonder, like, where is she? What's going on? Because she's coming back, so you're like, okay, she's waiting in the wing somewhere. What is she planning right now?
Yeah.
If it was too much of her, it might have been. I mean, sometimes that works out. Like in Misery, it's basically just a 2-person play for the whole movie, and it works great. But in this one, because it's kind of a love triangle, I like that it's not just all Walter and Eastwood the whole movie. I like that we get some other, the third actor in and their relationship and how that's growing, but that something is coming. I thought that worked really well. Anything else that Clint Eastwood brought to the movie as a director that you liked or noticed or maybe didn't like? Anything else that he brought to this first film as director?
I think we pretty much covered it. Like, I can't think of like anything else. The camera moves I thought were pretty smooth. How he framed certain shots and when they sort of hit, where they were married in the narrative, I think hit at the right spots. Like, he could have gone overboard and like overly stylized this thing, but I'm glad that he had, like, it's nice that he had restraint, and I think that's something he's carried throughout all of his movies that he's directed. Is this restraint, whether that's too much or not, or not enough, or or what have you. But I think it works nicely here. So it's not too much. It's just the right amount at some part. He could
have sat down for a week and studied like all the great Hitchcock films and really like tried to make this more Hitchcockian and a movie that's not of him but of someone else. I think that would have been the wrong choice. I like that he tells the story in a way that we have come to recognize in most of his films. He doesn't give us a lot of flashy cinematography. He's all about telling the story, however it needs to be told, and he does that here really well, as he almost always does in his films.
And I know, like, a lot of people, there are some shots and some sort of constructions, especially when, like, Jessica Walter is hacking away at the housekeeper,
right?
And there's some shots there that look very reminiscent of Hitchcock, like hitting but not really hitting, so it's sort of bloodless, but your mind is filling in the gaps. So it's like Hitchcockian in the way where it's not a parody of Hitchcock. So I think he brought that to that. And like, the only thing that's missing from this is Hitchcock's name, but it's not overbearingly, this is Hitchcockian, as directors are prone to do these days, which is like mimic versus, an homage.
Yeah, didn't they say that on the documentary? Like, if Alfred Hitchcock's name had been on the poster, the movie would have done even better at the box office. Someone had told Clint Eastwood that.
So
I don't know. I just watching this again, I'm just like, it's just so interesting to me that he never made another thriller like this in his entire career. But he goes where the great stories are. And as you said, I just think, if the story wasn't there was no reason for him, especially after like Unforgiven and winning Academy Awards. And there's no reason for him to do a genre like this if the story doesn't reach out to him. So, but I'm glad we have one. I'm glad we have this one.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like this is a not well done, like, thriller horror movie. We've got this one, and he did it, and we have it to cherish for 50 years, apparently.
50 years. Yes,
50
years as a director. And as I said, his new film Cry Macho just came out. He's 91 years old, and I think I read in an interview once, like he wants to direct till he's 101.
Wow.
Go for it. 10 more years, Clint.
Yeah. Well, for a while there, he's like churning one out like every
year. Yeah.
Like, to have that sort of stamina is pretty incredible still now, like, especially now. Like, Cry Macho was fine. I liked it. Okay. There's some stuff in it.
It was entertaining.
It's entertaining. There's some good stuff in there, and he's still engaging with, like, he's always done character and society and stuff like that. But sometimes I would sort of hope that he would like pump the brakes a little bit, maybe one every 2 years, so you could like really get these things like finely tuned. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe do one more suspense film when he's like 97.
What if I love a good bookend. So like in a movie where
wouldn't that be something?
So wouldn't that be something if he finally finds the Play Misty for Me 2 it will be his last movie, and he's like This is perfect. Like, I love a clean bookend.
Yeah, in 2031, his last film comes out, and it's Play Misty for Me Again.
Yeah.
And he's still working he's still a disc jockey in
Still a disc
Carmel. And he gets another voice, another woman calls in, Play Misty for me. And he's like, I haven't heard this line for 60 years. And it's 100-year-old Eastwood, like walking
surprised. Surprised she was not dead in the water. Yeah. She survived the fall. She rigged the dummy to make him think. This has all been a 50-year long con. Yeah. She's alive.
I would appreciate it. I don't know if most audiences they'd be like, what?
What?
But one thing we haven't mentioned is the scene on behind me, for those of you watching, and of the poster is him like waking up, and she's sitting over him with a knife. That's a really striking, scary moment in the movie too. We haven't talked about.
I think the choice of the knife too, which knife she uses, is also pretty intimidating, because you think it would be like the large, what is it, a butcher knife that normal people like you always see in horror movies, but the fact she's using this long, not bread knife, but like this long knife is really like, she's really going for it, and it catches the light. And
I mean, I don't know if I don't know if I would describe this as a horror film, but it has horror elements in it. I mean, there's a good 3 or 4 kind of shock moments where she comes out of the dark, and I mean, he is playing with those tropes a little bit. It's not just like a thriller. I mean, there are moments in the movie that would have scared audiences big time back in 71. Yeah. I know my mom is a big fan of this movie. My mom was like 13 or 14 when it came out. I remember she told me like this was one of the scariest movies you saw when she was in her teens. Like, this was a movie that scared audiences of all different ages. And so there's definitely some horror elements. I don't know if I'd call it a horror film though. It's a little bit more of a thriller, but I wrote a paper in graduate school about the differences between horror and thriller. They're very close. Like, it's kind of hard to differentiate them sometimes. But
there's good jump scares in here, I think, and there's a lot of blood.
Yeah, that classic early 70s blood that never looks real.
Yes, when the housekeeper is like grasping the curtain, and it's that like thick like blood that's not really blood. It's not the corn syrup blood. It's more paint.
That shot. Yeah, that shot of where at the very end when Clint Eastwood, when he grabs the knife, doesn't his like hand go like down the knife? Oh my god. That what gave me the heebie-jeebies watching it. I was like, oh god, that's just, that how painful that would be. That's cringe. Where the punch is like, you know what, I'm just gonna punch her.
Yeah.
He's like, let's get this done.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I really enjoyed it. This is a great kind of first feature film by Eastwood. I think for people who haven't watched it in many, many years or even decades, it's worth another look. You can find it pretty much anywhere, and it's on Amazon. And I rented the really great DVD, which has that fantastic documentary on the movie. It's like almost an hour. It's pretty long, and interviews from the early 2000s with Eastwood, with Walter, and the rest of the cast, and just a really well done film. And I just like the mood of it, the look of it. It's just like a cool like early 70s thriller, and the fact that it's his first movie as director makes it even more special. I think it's really great. And then Walter's performance, I think, is just fantastic.
Agree.
Yeah. So my last question, I asked this of each guest, Courtney, is if they were to we talked a little bit about Play Misty for Me too. Like, I always ask, it's been 50 years. If they were to take this property and make it now, if they were to take Play Misty for Me, the script, and update it to 2021, how do you think they would do it? How would they make this again? And we've seen this kind of stalker story over and over. I don't know how you do it in 2021 and make it really fresh. Do you have any thoughts on how you would make it today? Make it really interesting?
I'm not a screenwriter, so I just critique what screenwriters do. So I'm going to make that perfectly clear. So I don't want to bring any shame to the screenwriters out there who are actually clever and doing it right and being innovative and ingenious, but like, I can think of all the wrong ways people would do it, and they would probably overload it with technology and things that would make it not as timeless as how Play Misty for me would
Mm.
be. I think it would probably, somebody would probably gender swap it, which would
Right.
not, which may or may not work depending on what they do
Depending.
with it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know how they would have to exercise a lot of restraint.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't know how you could possibly sort of do that these days. Obviously, there are still stalkers around, and it's
Mhm.
still terrifying to have a stalker, but information is so much more readily available,
Right.
and still believable that you would believe somebody would just show up at your work and you wouldn't be like, well, how would they know where that person is? Just like, you would not be questioning, you do not question that in Play Misty for Me. You
Mm.
know that she's like got a hawk eye on him. She's always lurking in the background somewhere
Yeah.
with
I mean,
him.
I almost think it'd be interesting if someone were to update it, but still set it in the 70s. Could be kind of interesting. If you
Mhm.
had like a really cool, talented director and like
Yeah.
a fantastic cast and those, at least those main two roles, but you set it still back then, like that could be kind of
Mhm.
interesting. Maybe
Mhm.
not updating it, like doing like a swim fan or something, like
Yeah.
where we're gonna make it teenagers and it's 2021 and make it hip. Like I don't,
Yeah.
that can be kind of questionable.
Yeah, definitely Swim Fan is the update of Play Misty for Me. Now I'm getting that connection and it's so funny.
There have been others, right? Wasn't there one with Beyonce called Obsessed from like 09?
Yes. And she like goes into his house and I think somebody crashes through the coffee table that's glass.
I have vague memories of that movie. I think there's like a fight between Beyonce and Ali Larder at the end, like up in the attic or something.
Yes, this is sounding familiar. Yes.
So it's been done. So I don't know. Yeah, you'd have to bring something of interest to it, even if you were to make it now, but set it back then. I don't know. I mean, there's been so many. I mean, I think there's something you could do with it, but for now, I think it's good just keeping it as is.
Yeah, it's good keeping it as. I think there was a Netflix movie that was out maybe 2 years ago. It was one of the best worst movies of the year, I thought. With I can't remember the actors' names. I'm gonna like regret this. I'll have to get back to you on it later.
I think there was another kind of like obsessed stalker movie in the last couple of years that I might have watched, and I can't remember anything except there was like a fight between two women in the house at the end. That's how memorable this movie was.
Yeah, this one that I'm thinking of, it was a guy stalking his ex-girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
And she had like moved on, but literally all they do is sort of like kiss a little bit and that's all they do. And then like he starts being like, I'm going to tell your husband. And then she starts freaking out like, oh my God, don't tell my husband. Even though like all you did was like sort of kiss a little bit and there's no shame in just telling your husband, like, I stopped it, da 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 da, or whatever. He seemed like he was a pretty forgiving guy anyways. But like then this whole thing ensues and he starts stalking her and I wish I could remember the name because
I remember it was hated by critics so much that I was like, I have to watch this. That's what I remember.
Yes.
But it doesn't. It's just like it's gone from my memory.
Yes, so, I wiped the title from my memory.
So yeah, so I remember it wasn't great. So like if you're gonna watch like a newer cheesy one, maybe Obsessed with Beyonce might be the one to go with.
There you go.
But so yeah, that takes us to our final two segments. The first one is called the Divine Double Feature, where we pick a modern film to pair with it. And I would pick a newer stalker film that I didn't think was a great movie, but I liked it. And that was Greta. Did you see Greta?
I did see Greta, yeah.
Chloe Grace Moretz and Isabelle Huppert. Not a great film, but I had fun with it. And I really love both of those actresses. And I just loved watching them kind of banter back and forth and Huppert just slowly becoming more and more psychotic. I remember the ending was a little weak, but they're such talented actresses. I really like watching them for the majority of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my pick to pair with this. Fatal Attraction would be the obvious one, right?
Sure. Mine is not quite as stalkery, but I guess like it's Unfaithful, the Adrian Lyne movie.
Great film.
Which I thought was really well handled. I've watched a couple of times since. Like, I mean, it's sexy as fuck, but like, sorry for the swear word.
It is. And Diane Lane is so great in that. I was so happy when she got nominated for the Oscar. That was a cool nomination.
Yeah, it was great. And I think Richard Gere is really great in it as, this sort of husband who is
Hmm.
left sort of unmoored by realizing that his wife has cheated on him, and sort of the moral and ethical repercussions that sort
Hmm.
of come back to haunt him, but also a little bit her, but more so him, uh, considering, what he does
Hmm.
with the information. And it's beautifully photographed, and like Olivier, is it Martinez? Um,
Yeah, I think
the,
so.
the guy,
Olivier something.
yeah. But he's gorgeous, and the whole thing is
Yeah.
just, it's photographed so beautifully, and it's sexy, and Diane Lane gives a beautiful performance in it too. And it just sort of leaves you on this ambiguous note of like, well, what did they do? And so you're still thinking about the movie after, and
Hmm.
you're also thinking, well, did she get away with it? I don't really think she got away with it,
Mm.
because it felt like a little more defined of an answer than Fatal Attraction and Play Misty for Me, in the fact where I don't think this is a life worth living after, you know both of the
And that's
characters
the
do.
same director, right? Of Fatal Attraction, Adrian Lynn. He did
Hmm.
both.
Hmm.
Yeah. So there's
Yeah.
definitely a certain kind of film that Adrian Lynn liked to make, didn't he?
Hmm. 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 So that's my
That,
pick.
that's very cool. Yeah, that would have been 15 years apart. Fatal Attraction was 87 and
Mm.
Unfaithful was 2002. Very cool. Yeah, I love that movie. I haven't seen it in a long time. I want to check that out again. Maybe for its 20th anniversary next year. I'll take a look at Unfaithful again. Very cool. And so my final segment is called Beyond the Flick. That's where we take an actor or a director or a genre and talk about it a little bit deeper. So I thought this probably be the only time on the podcast I'll talk about Jessica Walter, because she isn't in a whole lot of films of the 70s that I could see. I wanted to say a few more words about her. She unfortunately passed away earlier this year in March at the age of 80. Such a talented actress. Anything else you wanted to add, kind of talking about her career as a whole, or any other films or shows you've seen of her?
She had done like a few like one-off, like for a while there, doing some one-off like television shows here, there, and
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, sort of in the 70s and 80s. And I'm sort of guessing, or extrapolating that might be how she sort of kept her career going,
Right.
while also balancing, family and still and her career. But she was great in Grand Prix, um, which is an interesting movie, and it can be kind of a little bit dry,
Mm-hmm.
but she looks great. She gives a great performance that was memorable.
And
Um,
that's 1966, I want to say,
I
somewhere around
think
there.
so. Yeah,
She
it's
got
even
it. She got a
earlier than
gold. Her
this.
other Golden Globe nomination was for that film. She was
Oh,
nominated for Most Promising Newcomer Female.
mm,
Back when they had
that
Most
makes sense.
Promising
Was
Male
that
and
the
Female.
was that the category that Pia Zadora like essentially killed?
Was it in the early 80s?
I
Was that the
can't
category?
remember. I feel like Pia Zadora got something, and like
Yeah. Oh
people
yeah.
were. I feel like it was that category, but I'm really bad with my awards
Yeah.
knowledge.
But yeah, I look back at when we're talking about films of the early 70s for the podcast, and it'll say most promising newcomer male or female. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that's a category that at some point was done away with, because you don't see it
Yeah.
in the 80s and later. But yeah, that was your other nomination. I can't say I saw Grand Prix, but I now, having watched Play Misty for Me, I kind of want to seek out some of her larger films. That's what I'm
Hmm.
definitely going to look at for sure.
Hmm.
Anything
And she
else you
had
saw her
done.
in? Yeah.
Yeah, for a while there, I was obsessed with watching Hotel, which is this old like um gosh, Aaron Spelling, I think, produced the show. And it was sort of like Love Boat, but it's set in a hotel in San Francisco.
Okay.
And so every week it would be like this different cast of characters who have these like weirdo problems that the hotel concierge would have to solve, or
Mm.
whatever, or the staff would get dragged into, or whatever. And it was bonkers stuff, and not a lot of it aged well. So I'm sure she's on like, I think, one of those episodes,
Okay.
that I'm sure I came into contact with, and was probably like, oh, hey, it's Lucille Bluth. This is great. It's great to see her. So I think it was probably, I would say that, but also, of course, Arrested Development, I think, was,
Mm.
yet another sort of defining career point for her, where she was really like coming into her own and having this like I don't know, second or third wind to her career, or whatever you want to call it. But I think she's absolutely fantastic in Arrested Development.
She might be my favorite part of that series. I just think I love her character in that so much. Her lines, go see a Star Wars, one that always comes to mind. Like, she's just so funny. And then the fact that she got to do it again in the Netflix kind of, not reboot, but like they continued the series later on, to see her again in that. And that's like one of the last things she did, I want to say, right? I mean, I think the last thing she did was voicing Archer. I think episodes aired after she passed away earlier this year. But the fact that we got to see her as Lucille again in the Netflix Arrested Development was really cool. And yeah, I mean, just a really phenomenal career. Obviously a lot of credits that I would have not have heard of. But looking through IMDb this week, I was like, wow, she was a working actor. She was working all the time, not necessarily in major films. I was like kind of astonished. She's so great in Play Misty for Me. I'm like, how did she not get scooped up by some other great directors in the 70s and some really great, like, you know, auteur films and some, you know, maybe not like the big giant films of each year, but like, look, I mean, she's in very, very little theatrically after Play Misty for Me in the 70s and even into the 80s. And I'm like, how come, like, did nobody see this movie? Why were they not giving her better roles in theatrical films? I don't know what happened.
Curious. Yeah, I'm curious too if she kept on getting, like, you know, when a certain actor is, like, quote unquote discovered, even though she was quote unquote discovered, like, you know, years prior in Grand Prix, like, I'm curious if she kept on getting, like, if she's had that danger of getting typecast. And I'm wondering if, like, people sent her, like, the same sort of character and she was like, no, this isn't even close to, like, what I played, so I'm turning it down. So I'm curious if, like, if that ever came into play. I don't know. And maybe we'll never know. Or maybe there's an interview out there somewhere that I need to sort of uncover.
And I don't believe Eastwood ever directed her again in anything. I think this was the only time that they worked together. So I'm curious if there was ever another opportunity where he might have even just thought of her for a role for one of his films. But yeah, so that's too bad. But at the same time, she's in a lot of great work. She did another film for Sidney Lumet called Bye Bye Braverman. She's in Slums of Beverly Hills, which I saw once many years ago. I don't remember who she played in it, but I remember really liking that film. I think it was that was the directorial debut of Tamara Jenkins, who made one of my favorite movies of the 2000s, The Savages, which is so great. I love that movie. And so she's in, and obviously, as we talked about, Arrested Development. She received in her long career 5 Emmy nominations. She won an Emmy in 1975 for her role in a project called Amy Prentice. So she did win an Emmy at one point. So that's cool.
Good for her.
Good for her. So yeah, we missed you, Jessica. We missed you, Jessica. We love you as an actress. We love you in Play Misty for Me. You're so great in this. I'm glad we have this performance on film forever. It's really fantastic. All right, so that takes us to the end here, Courtney. Thanks so much for being here today on Film at 50. Do you have anything you'd like to promote or tell our listeners where they can find you online? Our listeners, you need to follow her on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle? It's great.
The probably the best place to reach me is my Twitter handle. Okay. At least nicely. Don't tweet me things that are mean.
There you go.
I don't like things that are mean. So it's at Lula May Bell.
Okay.
Is my Twitter handle. And that's also my Instagram handle if you want to see cute pictures of dogs and you know, my vinyl obsession that I'm going through and you know, maybe some shoes occasionally. I don't know.
Yeah. But this was such a blast to have you on today talking about this very important film, I think, from 1971 for a lot of reasons. Just a really, really great movie. Really fun to have you on today, Courtney. And thank you for being here. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. And we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.